You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Hello, Mark. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me here today.
I'm all giggly, and I've already said this in the introduction, but we know each other pretty well, and I know you well enough to know that your life has taken some twists and turns on the way to where you are now. So I wanted to start by asking you about a little of your backstory. You've always been a pretty fit and active guy. You played representative football in high school. What took you to study accountancy? How come that's where you headed after school?
The reason I studied accountancy was I thought that it would be a good profession. I also thought that I'd make a lot of money doing it. But when I was sitting there in the auditorium in my second semester, surrounded by 200 other people, I just knew it wasn't for me. So that was the end of that.
So it seemed very briefly like the smart and sensible choice, and then all too quickly you realized that it wasn't for you.
Yeah, it probably took longer than all too quickly, but yes. Yeah, exactly.
And so what made an electrical qualification, a trade qualification, the next choice?
The next choice actually came about that it was 1 week's difference between me becoming a plumber or becoming an electrician. The electrician rang 1 week before the plumber did. So there was my life detouring off on that way. But it was great. I loved being an electrician. And to this day, I am still a registered electrician.
So if anybody in Queenstown needs electrical work done, you know you can contact Mark, not just for yoga, not just for massage and remedial therapy and reflexology, but also for electrical work.
If they want.
Now, soon after I met you, you shifted again from your electrical trade to studying and then working in massage and then into remedial therapy. And you were very passionate about fascia long before I heard about it from anybody else or from anywhere else. So could you talk a little about your remedial therapy life, how you transitioned to teaching that, how you were introduced to fascia? Talk us through those sorts of years.
Sure. I do remember those years with you when I was trying to talk to you about fascia and you wouldn't have a bar of it.
I was not even slightly interested. I was only learning about muscle anatomy and I thought I knew it all. Contract bicep, bend elbow. That's all I needed to know. Thank you very much.
Yes. So the remedial side of things came about thanks to your mother, my partner. She was studying massage therapy and I thought it was a pretty good thing to do because I love working with my hands and became quite proficient at it. We did have some clients who were asking about a particular form of massage, which was to do with the fascia. So we investigated and found a course and we went and we did that course. And that was just the first part, the stepping stone. Years later, we came across another particular school that taught a far more proficient means of explaining what we were doing with this stuff called fascia. And it wasn't long after that we had the opportunity of actually becoming instructors. That's both me and my partner, your mother. We became instructors, teaching other people to become therapists. So that's pretty much how the journey eventuated. And along the way, I must admit, it has been great to see the advancement in people's awareness of fascia, because in the early days, trying to talk about it, it was like, it just go over people's heads. They had no idea what we were talking about.
You got the same response as you did from me. Like, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's all
Yeah,
about the fascia, whatever.
yeah. But I think it's now proven that if we can work with the fascia effectively, whether it be through the body work or through the yoga, changes can happen for people.
Mm.
And we might get to talk about that later on.
Hopefully. And I
Mm.
remember fairly early on that you went and did a workshop or a training with Robert Schleip, who has now been a guest on the podcast, and that brought you back with a whole host of new ideas and a new way of conceiving fascia and talking about it to people.
Definitely. If that was actually in New Zealand, I think it was around 2009-ish. I think he came and visited New Zealand. And if anybody hasn't and would love to learn in depth about fascia, I could highly recommend Robert. He won't remember me, that's for sure. But I found him incredibly fascinating to listen to because he was somebody who was just taking things to the next level. And yes, whenever you come away from a workshop, you're just buzzed up, aren't you? And you want to get into it and tell everybody what you've learned. And that was me. So I've taken, and I still refer to his work when I work with clients, and even probably when I'm working with yoga classes or yoga privates. Yeah.
And I know that you were introduced to yoga by the same person who introduced me, which is my mother, your partner, Lynn, who has
Yes.
been practicing yoga since probably the very early 1970s or maybe earlier. She can probably correct
Probably.
us on
Yeah.
that. She can fact
Yeah.
check us.
Yeah.
So what took you to teaching? What inspired you to shift from being a yoga student to being a teacher?
Well, Rachel, that was you. Sorry, I keep playing with my ear, but my blood keeps falling out. Yeah, no, honestly, after you'd done your training, you were aware of my sort of awareness and enthusiasm for body work and how that could actually be then transferred, really, the skills into becoming a yoga teacher. And I'm so glad I did. I loved my yoga teacher training. It was wonderful. It was in a very special place called Byron Bay. That's in Australia. And it was a 200-hour intensive. And coming away from that, I've been able to, I think, explain to people that yoga by itself, whatever sort of form of yoga that you do, is probably the best thing you can do for fascia, because there's so much that the fascia can respond to in your yoga practice. So yeah, it's a big thing, big part of my life for sure.
I think you were and still are a really ideal person to teach because you already knew quite a lot about traditional anatomy and quite a lot about fascial anatomy. You already understood the nature of having a therapeutic relationship with a student. And you were just adding on this extra tool in your toolkit, something that you already did and practiced yourself. So, and I think too, the more diverse the yoga teaching population, the more diverse the students that we draw in. And if every yoga teacher is a 25-year-old ex-dancer, you'll only get so many people coming to yoga classes. Whereas if you have an ex-tradesperson who's a big, strong guy and not crazy flexible, it just brings a different group of people to classes, and it makes the classes feel quite different as well.
I agree with that. There is to be a sense of normality about it. You're right. I am a big man, big person. I am smaller than in my weight than what I was years ago. I was trying to calculate when I was in my 20s, I desperately wanted to be 100 kilograms, which is, I think, about 250 pounds. I got to 98. Now I've sort of slimmed down to about 86. But with that, it comes the muscle bulk and restricted movement. But at the same time, I was somebody who wasn't able to touch my toes, and now I can comfortably do that. So the normality is that when people that are in the classroom teaching to a group class see what you can and what you can't do, it makes them, I think, feel that bit more comfortable. It's like, oh, there's a yoga teacher that can't put his foot behind his head, or something that's very nice to look on Instagram, but in reality, it's not that functional. I think they just feel more comfortable in the class, and that's how I try and teach. Or that's how I wish the classes that I teach come across, is like,
Yeah.
whatever you can do is absolutely fine.
And I know you mentioned in your teacher training, and I had done the same one a year previously. I know that you know that, but for the people who are listening, we both struggled a little bit with the philosophy side of things. I think we both felt pretty comfortable in the physical asana practice, but the philosophy was just this whole new and unfamiliar world. And I think for both of us, teaching a style of yoga that feels a little bit more practical and a little bit more rooted in the day to day also attracts a different group of people, and makes a practice accessible to people who might be made nervous or scared off by philosophy. Even though I do blend in more these days than I used to, and I think you do too, subtly, having that sort of practical, real life approach also broadens the group of people that might come to your classes.
Yes, philosophy in yoga is important, but we can't be able to do, or we're not able to sort of specialize in everything. And just referencing again, my background from the massage and through the study of fascia is very anatomically based, and so I like to teach anatomically based, and that comes across very strongly in my classes. But for those people who do teach more the philosophy, well, I respect you. It's just something that I know it's there. I just don't get my head around it as well as I do anatomy. It's like learning another language. Anatomy just spoke to me far more strongly than philosophy did.
And I think you're right. I think as teachers, we all need to find our sort of wheelhouse, the aspect of this really huge and rich practice that speaks to us. And we can nudge the edges a little bit, but there's no point trying to pretend to be something completely different from what you are. Yeah.
No, you would get found out very quickly.
Yeah.
If you tried to be something that you weren't. Yeah.
I agree. Now, you have said this many times. You gave me a quote as part of the preparation for the podcast, and I've heard you say this before, so I know this rings true for you. People don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's one of those things that sounds trite, but there's a real depth to it, isn't there?
There is a depth for me. As far as a therapist is concerned, no matter how many qualifications, and I know that many of your listeners have many qualifications more than I do, I'm not being disrespectful, but no matter how many qualifications you have, if you still cannot make a connection to the person who is there with you, they're not really going to care. They're not interested in seeing all the certificates you have. And I think that is with also yoga training. There are so many yoga trainings that you can do and do and do, and I certainly encourage people to do them. But I'd also just like to say that coming back, you have to be yourself. So no matter how much you know, people really don't care until they know how much you care. And I think those teachers who are able to give their full attention when they're teaching in a class are the ones that can hold a class for that length of time, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 45 or 90 minutes. And I think people appreciate that there is somebody there who is giving it to them for that length of time. Yeah. So that's what the quote means for me.
Yeah, I very much agree with what you've said there, because I think in this community in particular, there's a real hunger for education. And like you, I have a lot of respect for that. There's always more to learn. And so we should never stop and assume that we know everything. But as a teacher, standing really humbly in the place of paying attention means that it doesn't matter what you do or don't know. If you are guided by what you're seeing in front of you, and you go in with that open-minded inquiry of, does it help if X or does it help if Y, you really can't go wrong. And I think that's something that we have to remind ourselves as teachers all the time when we come up against a situation that's, to the edge of our area of expertise or even outside of our area of expertise. We don't need to be the expert if we're paying attention to the person in front of us and just dealing with what comes up in our interaction.
I agree with you, and I'll just go forward a little bit. I think in that we'll all have people coming up to us and asking, I've got this injury, what should I do? And if you are a newer teacher, what was mentioned to me many years ago as a therapist is that you'll never ever get into trouble for referring on too soon. So if you don't know, then suggest find somebody who has the better qualification. It might pay for you to follow up and to research, but never be too embarrassed that you don't know something or to refer on too soon.
I agree, and even if you think you do know, without a full intake and assessment, you don't have anywhere near enough information. So even if what's going on for them sounds like exactly what you had with your shoulder or what your mum had with her knee, doesn't necessarily mean that it is until you dig into all the details, which you can't do.
Wouldn't you feel really bad if you gave them bad advice and something turned out for the worst?
Yeah. So hopefully we've set a nice reassuring tone for people who are bamboozled by the yoga medicine environment and have that hunger to always feel like they should know more. Keep that hunger, but I think just remind yourself that you can't go wrong if you're paying attention to the people in front of you and responding accordingly.
Yes.
And that sentiment, that quote that I read out of yours, I really wanted to bring up here because I feel like it's such a beautiful junction between your work as a remedial therapist doing body work with people and your work as a yoga teacher. That phrase or that quote really is a good compass to use in both of those roles.
Yes. Yeah. I think if you could take it on, yes, it is a good compass. Do with it what you will. Yeah, for sure.
That's a very marked response. It's a good quote.
Is.
Maybe not for everyone. So we teach many of the same students, and a lot of them, let's say most over 40, many of them over 60, but you also teach classes to older adults. You teach balance classes to seniors, you teach classes in retirement villages, and that's what brings us to our real topic of focus today, which is aging well with yoga and what you've learned for your own self from working with older adults. And I want to highlight that we know not everybody listening will be older. We know that not everybody listening works with older adults, but there's so much to be learned from this population. And it's very deserving, I think, of nuanced conversation, because on social media, I think you can get the impression that yoga for older adults is just chair yoga or just, very gentle, maybe restorative yoga. But there's obviously a lot more to it than that. And it's a population that can actually benefit from really intelligent, strengthening work and from facing a challenge. So I'm hoping we can kind of unpack working with older students in a bit more detail so that people go well beyond that stereotype of just chair yoga.
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to say that there is such a spectrum of people who will be coming. And even though that most of the listeners probably won't be as old as I am or older, the younger ones, you still may have.
If you're not watching on video, he's hunched over. His face is creased like a walnut into wrinkles.
Thank you. What I would like to say is that perhaps you have mothers, fathers, uncles, the whole gamut, right up to grandparents, that from what our discussion will be about is that you might just say, hey, granddad, you should go and try this because you might spark something for you. And that's I think what the gist of what we're talking about, I hope will obviously be coming to the forefront.
I do think that's a really important place to start, because of all of the populations that I've ever taught, older adults are the most varied. Because even if you compare, 20-year-olds who are video gamers versus 20-year-olds who are athletes, within a relatively short space of time, you could have both groups doing fairly similar practices. But with older adults, whatever habits we've had in our lives have been accentuated. We keep the skills that we continue to practice and we lose the skills that we stop practicing. And so two different older adults will tend to be much more diverse than two different younger students. And so that diversity, I think, can be huge. You can't go into a class assuming that every person over 60 needs exactly the same thing, because some of them are still incredibly aggressive skiers or mountain bikers, and some of them spend all of their weekends gardening, and some of them will have a really deep spiritual or philosophical practice. They're going to be even more different than we are in our 40s, 30s, 20s, teens. So I think that diversity, recognizing that from the outset, is really important. But saying that, what general themes do you tend to focus on if you're teaching a group of older students?
Balance, strength, and mobility would be the three key things. And when I'm teaching my seniors balance class and my classes into the retirement villages, it's about also laughter, having some fun along the way. I mean, these people that I've been working with for a number of years now have come such a long way from those first classes. And a part of it is that they'll learn their the skills we go through that I teach them, and I come up with some quite playful activities for them, and to hear them laugh when they're doing these things, it brings a lot of happiness to me, a lot of joy. I know that's not for everybody, but so mobility, strength, balance, and then laughter would be the key things that I'm trying to get across in my classes. Yeah.
I love that. I love the fact that even though your tendency is to be practical and anatomical, that sort of intangible side sneaks in, doesn't it? The power of community and just that knowing that they're going to see each other each week, and even that little bit of competitiveness between them, even though that's something we don't always encourage in yoga, can be really empowering.
You'll find there's not a little bit of competitiveness. There's quite a bit of competitiveness in the senior classes. They are, especially when it comes to the ball skills that I teach them. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing, and I think if anybody has the opportunity to teach a seniors or older, I would say try and do it. There is no right, there is no wrong way. Yeah, we learn along the way when we do things. And I do think also that because I'm over 50, I have that little bit more of a connection to if I was doing this when I was 20. But then also was the flip side is that they're not taking instructions from a 20-year-old. They're taking instructions from a 50-odd-year-old, and who has some stiffness, but still mobile.
Yeah. Becomes that little bit more relatable.
It does. It does become relatable. Yeah. And coming back again, they don't care how much I know, but they do know how much I care about them. And that's been evident in many classes.
Well, let's explore those themes in a little bit more detail, starting with the sort of mobility side. Given that you know quite a bit about fascia, what can you tell us about our fascia as we age? What changes we tend to see in terms of its impact on our mobility and range of motion?
So the first thing that happens is that when we age, we develop patterns from our lifestyles. And we know that these patterns will impact upon your joint mobility, joint range of motion. It may impact upon you cognitively. It may impact upon you digestively, cardiovascularly. So the first thing we have to understand is that we're going to get older and our patterns are going to become more and more embedded into our tissues. The tissues age. They do not repair as quickly as they do when we were younger. They become a little bit less hydrated, so we lose that beautiful action of the glide and slide that happens in the fascia. The movement that people expect to get diminishes. That's not across the board, but I do think that some people they don't try to extend themselves. And so when you don't try and take your body into certain areas because you don't feel safe, then you're just narrowing your box, your life down and down, and becoming smaller and smaller. So I think that's probably the main things that I see happening. There are probably many more.
Yeah, no, I think you've picked out the really important ones from my perspective as well, that our fascia kind of shrink wraps around the patterns that we create the most often. And so we can't assume teaching a class of older students the same range of motion that we might assume in a class of younger students, even though some will have a higher range of motion and some will have a lower range of motion. We just shouldn't assume that from the outset. So that's the first thing, is that the mobility changes. And the other thing I wanted to draw out that you mentioned was that recovery can be a little bit slower, that you might not teach with quite the same intensity. You can definitely build quite a lot of strength over time, but you might not hit the same intensity of peak in any one given class as you might with younger students, knowing that it's going to take the connective tissue a little bit longer to recover than it did for that same person when they were 30, 20, 15, whatever.
Sure. I mean, that is exactly the scenario. That is our bodies. But again, don't be, when I'd say to teachers, don't be too gentle. Our bodies can be pushed, and they are resilient. And sometimes you need to know where where the limitations are when you're working with people. But yes, the older we get, it does take a little bit longer for us to bounce back, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think you've hit a really important facet there, which is that our fascia will adapt again. It's not that it's this gradual shrink wrap that becomes smaller and smaller until we die, and that's the end of things. Our fascia continues to respond to our movement habits and our postural habits and our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings. So we can intervene and create changes in our students over time, can't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, you've hit on something that by changing the patterns, you can change people's emotions, and by changing the emotions, you can change their patterns. So it feeds into one another, which I think is
you can
wonderful.
kind of kick off this really positive spiral of every class, slightly more movement, every class, that little bit more confidence or playfulness or camaraderie or laughter that, again, changes their approach to giving something a try the next time. So I love that.
Yeah. The people who may have been not interested in health when they were younger do tend to obviously have that focus as they get older. So if you can introduce something to them that they can get their head around or their minds around, they'll take that on board. Yeah, for sure.
And it is a very loyal and disciplined group of students, because they can feel the difference the next day. They can feel the difference that whole week. So if you can get a group of older students hooked on the practice, they'll be very loyal students, because, unlike when we're 20, they can really feel the difference day to day when they practice versus when they don't.
Yes, exactly. And they're motivated.
Yeah, that's the perfect word for it. High motivation.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why they're a joy to teach.
Yes, I agree. So that's the sort of mobility side, gradually stretching people's patterns that little bit, trying to encourage slightly larger arcs of movement, slightly more adventurous movement patterns, knowing that they might not recover with the same pace that they did or that we did when we were younger. The second piece that you talked about was balance and stability. And this is somewhere that I know you have some really playful and innovative ideas to share. So how do you work balance and stability in your seniors balance class, where that's the prime focus of the yoga practice?
Sure. Well, I'll just clarify. When I teach the senior balance class, and you mentioned yoga in the same sentence, there's no yoga mats involved. We don't do any downward facing dogs.
They might not even know that they're practicing yoga, in fact.
That's right. There is no chairs in the room as well. So I have to be quite adaptive. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I use are balls. Now, these are inflatable balls about 8 inches in diameter or 25 centimeters. And we'll do activities where the balance comes where they're bouncing a ball, but they're bouncing a ball, then they're walking, and then they're balancing a ball walking backwards, and they're bouncing a ball walking sideways. I have these little things where the MFR ball little green MFR balls, and little orange
like
roadside
traffic
cones.
Yes.
Traffic cones, yeah. I mean, I set those out, and we do this activity where they have to, with one hand, pick the ball off the cone, with the other hand, put a ball down. So they're forward folding and crossing over as they're walking along. So it's being innovative, just doing things like that, which, to somebody in their 20s, it's like boring. But to somebody who is
to somebody
older,
with hand-eye coordination in their 20s, boring. I would find those sequences enormously challenging, even now. No hand-eye coordination whatsoever.
But they see it as a skill, and they know that it's just helping them, I guess in a way, broaden their outlook. It sounds strange to say that, but there's so many times during a class I'll ask them, other than when they're forward folding and picking up a ball, is to get that head up. Look out there. The life's out there. It's not down below. And so if they feel confident through their legs, their hip joints, okay, and their core to a degree, I don't do a lot of core, but we do touch upon it, they'll come away from that class feeling more inspired to try things. So again, they're the balance activities. Sure, I do block work as well, standing on a block, walking over the tops of blocks, walking
That's
to the
a huge
sides of
one,
the
isn't
blocks. Yeah, I think so, because if they can do it in a classroom, then they can try either assisted or by themselves at home, doing something, to walking up and down the steps, or walking up on one step, stepping down, or walking up on one step and holding there and then stepping down. It's a case for some of them, if they don't use it, they do lose it. And it's really it's lovely to hear where they might say something to me, come back to a class, and I'll go, "Oh, I'm now able to step over that small hedge without my walking stick." It's like, okay, well, great. You've done that. You've strengthened yourself.
And that's the real impact, isn't it? You don't particularly care if these students in their 80s and 90s can ever do tree pose or do dancers pose. It's kind of irrelevant, isn't it, compared to the importance of being able to step from hard floor over the little lip of a rug without tripping on the rug, or lifting their leg up and over the edge of a bathtub to step into the bath to take a shower. All of those real life things, stepping over the hedge without having to use a walking stick, because when you're in your 80s or 90s, the impact of a fall can be life altering. It can be the difference between you being independent at home and not.
Yeah. So all these things are really for their functionality, their functional well-being. You're right. Tree pose means nothing to them. Being able to stand on one leg for 2 minutes means nothing to them. But if they can press down through one foot, lift up through one knee, and step over something, well, that means something to them.
Yeah. And I definitely love the fact that you do some work on varied footing, standing on a block, that soft sponge surface. I love the fact that you have people stepping over the block, forward, backwards, sideways, all of the places where obstacles tend to catch people unawares in daily life. But the ball work, I think, is particularly interesting because it kind of taps back into what you were talking about with the fascia of broadening people's patterns, kind of taking them out of that funnel of doing less and less and less new things to more and more and more new things, and engaging different neuromuscular connections and opposite hand and foot, and walking in what kind of looks from the outside like an obstacle course, is basically getting them to create a relationship between the brain and the body that's fresh again.
Correct. You just said the most important two words: the brain and the body. There's a research paper I just read last week that's come out of the UK that talks about balance and cognitive connection. And so, if we can build better, stronger neural pathways, that not only helps people reduce the incidence of dementia, but also for them to help with their balance. So I have been, unbeknownst to me, following this particular research that they've been doing in the UK in my own little research lab, in the studio is doing all these things that build these new cognitive skills. Like, again, this one may be a bit too hard to describe across a podcast, but you've got two rows of people, and each of the two rows of people has a soft blow-up ball. And the activity, it starts off that one row bounces the ball across to the other people. Okay. Now they will then bounce the ball back. So it's just a simple bouncing activity. Okay. Then it goes from bouncing, and then it goes to throwing a ball across to each other. Okay. So they've got that. Then it goes to each side of the room has a ball. One side of the room bounces, the other side of the ball throws. The other side of the room
I can feel
throws
myself getting stressed out.
So I've got these 90-year-olds, I've got these 82-year-olds laughing their heads off as the balls are being bounced, and they're trying to catch them and bouncing and catching them. And then, of course, it gets even harder. We swap it around, don't we? So the side that we're bouncing now is throwing. And, this sort of connection that they're trying to make, is very good for them. Where it will finish, where it'll end, who knows? But they feel they're getting a lot out of it. And I think I see they get a lot out of it.
Yeah. I think we'll link to that paper in the show notes, because it really is worth people diving in to have a look. And it relates so far a little bit more to verbal and language cognition. But I think all of the work that you're doing runs in a very similar vein, because there's some memory and problem solving and anticipation required. And it's not necessarily the first place that we would think of training balance, because I always think, feet and ankles, yes, hip stabilizers, core stabilizers, yes, and then practicing varying orientations, varied footing, moving balance, static balance, but involving the brain. Why not harness the most powerful organ in the body to kind of expand people's options?
All those things that you mentioned are all super important. But yes, if you can also tap in to the brain, the power of it, who knows where it might go for them.
And it also leads into the other aspect that you mentioned, the camaraderie, the communal feel, that sangha, that people, that they're meeting up with the same group of people every week, and they have that check-in, how are you doing? What happened with the whatever event happened this week? And we also know from research how important those societal structures are to us aging with a little bit more grace and liveliness to us.
Definitely. Yes, if you'd ever, I'm sure if you ever walked into a group of older people, whether they're in a coffee shop together, whether they're at a restaurant together, the connection that you see that they have is amazing. And that's sometimes what the feeling is like in these classes. It's like, people know people, and whether they're going to turn up to the class or not, or somebody's, going to the chiropodist or the orthopedic surgeon or something.
All the gossip. But
so find out about that.
You've created this kind of vivid and lively picture. And I think we can all imagine the opposite, like the most depressing nursing home on the planet, where there's just people facing away from each other, completely vacant. You can see the difference between that sort of spark of electricity that's generated when people are engaged with each other, and how that creates that youthful, lively energy, versus the opposite. Its absence is so obvious.
Yeah, there's sort of like this idea of inertia. If you were in a older nursing home, it is so much to try and get movement happening in people, or a collective of people. Whereas it is ideal, or it has been ideal for me, that I was so fortunate to have so many like-minded people who were older that wanted to improve upon themselves. And we've just taken that and we just run with it.
Galloped off with it.
Yes.
So we've talked about mobility and the importance of stretching our movement patterns to keep our movement patterns kind of options open, rather than shrink wrapping in on ourselves. We've talked about balance and stability. We've talked about community and fun and laughter and camaraderie. There's something else that I know you teach a lot of in classes, and I'm surprised that you didn't mention, and that is breathing, because I know how passionate you are about the breath and about breathing mechanics. And I know what a huge difference it can make in people as we get older, and our connective tissue might not have the same elasticity, or our posture might have changed as we've gotten older, the impact that that can have on our breath and vice versa. So what would your suggestions be to people teaching breathing mechanics, not just to older students, but to all students?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to say, yes, breathing is now a very large part of my influence in the yoga practice, and I'm in private one-on-ones as well. There's a lot of talk about people being stressed out, and there certainly are a lot of people who are stressed out. And if you can access a tool that can help you reduce the anxiety, the high blood pressure, then this is at basically your nose. I was going to say your fingertips. This is basically at your nose to be taken and used. But I do think it's like, remember years ago, why would you buy water? It's like water is everywhere. It's like it's cheap.
Now we sound 100. When I was a child, no one was buying bottles of water. You just.
But I mean, it's like unless it's packaged, unless it looks flash and it's got a bit of glitter about it, it can't be any good for you. But there is breath right there for you, and I think if people are able to understand the importance that you can have for yourself and for others to teach them breathing. That's great. Whether you were to be like me, I've just trained in what is called the Buteyko method of breathing. It's a great method of breathing, but also what all I learned in my pranayama practice in my yoga training, great breathing there. But yes, some of the important things I would suggest that people know about breathing is to always breathe through your nose, not your mouth. I mean, there's a great reason why it gets filtered. There are this in the membrane of the nose, it's called nitric oxide. That nitric oxide takes the air down into the lungs. It's a bronchodilator. So we are getting the exchange of both carbon dioxide better through the lungs, but also into that bloodstream as well, which is really important. And sure, emphasizing that better breath can also give better posture, and better posture can also give better breath. So here we have these two things being tied in again. And so in a yoga class that I know you teach and I teach, is that there's so much about being able to have people find the capacity within both the rib cage and in the spine, and we can talk about the shoulder girdle as well, to feel like you are taking quality deep breaths into the body. And I know about also the movement of the diaphragm and the pelvic floor working in unison together. That's also very important. But yes, breathing, if you were working with a private person one-on-one and you didn't know where to start, and I'm sure you'd back me up on this, start with breath.
Start there.
Start with breath.
100%.
And it seems really strange. You've entered into this person's house and you're going to be teaching them yoga, and they just want to lie on the floor and learn how to breathe. It's like, really? Okay, we'll just spend nearly the hour breathing, and they're so happy.
It's such a huge lever that we can pull on to influence the central nervous system, and through it every other system, though, isn't it? But I love the fact that you started by saying it's sort of unexciting or unglamorous, like drinking water from the tap, because it is. It's almost as if we need to introduce a breathing technique to have people feel the experience of breathing, to notice how they feel different. For example, do Kapalabhati breath, notice how you feel. Now do Nadi Shodhana, notice how you feel. And all of a sudden people realize that their breath can impact their energetic state or their thoughts or their physical state.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, thank goodness that we have the autonomic nervous system that's directing this ability to breathe. Because if I had to think every time, breathe, Mark, it's like Mark wouldn't be here.
You would have forgotten at some point in your life disastrously.
Absolutely. But the in a yoga class, you can certainly teach ways of breathing, but also when you've done a flow, get people to stop. You don't always have to be completely moving the whole time. Even in vinyasa flow practice, you can get people to stop and just realize, oh my goodness me, this is how I'm breathing, and how quickly can I recover? And if you place this same emphasis upon your day-to-day life and stress, and what you hold on to and what you can let go of, the microcosm of the yoga room can reflect the macrocosm of our outside world. And that breath is a tool that you can use. And I mean, I've had some amazing experiences, feedback, where I haven't mentioned this, but I also teach a men's only stretch class. And in that men's only stretch class, one of the 72-year-olds was telling me about, he was at the dentist and having something done. And he's there going, I could just hear your voice, Mark, in my head. Just breathe in through the nose, out through the nose, in through the nose, out through the nose. And, there was an incident where a lady also was skiing, and she fractured quite badly her tibia and fibula. And they had the gas up on the mountain, but it wasn't working for her. And she said, all I could hear, Mark, was your voice. Breathing in through the nose, breathing out through. So it must resonate with some people.
This breathing thing, it must be working.
It must be working, yeah.
I think you've hit on something really important there, which is, sometimes we do need to play with techniques to have people realize what an impact their breath can have. But there's also such enormous power in simple breath awareness. Am I breathing through my nose? Am I breathing through my mouth? Am I just breathing into my chest? Can I feel the breath moving in my side ribs? Can I feel my breath slowing down as I stop moving and I recover? Just asking people to place their attention on the breath with some open-minded curiosity, that in itself, while it sounds so simple, can have such an enormous impact on people's physiology. And if they can then make the next step, as you said, of not just doing it when they're on the yoga mat, but taking it into a traffic jam, into physical pain, into physiological stress, like being at the dentist, then that's when the practice really does start to spill over into the real world.
Definitely. I mean, I will use the example of myself here, that to help me every time I sit in my car seat and drive, whether it be to classes or between clients, that is my breathing practice time. I am breathing slowly in, slowly out, slowly in, slowly out.
And you hear your own voice in your mind as you do that? Or is that just your students that get that?
At the moment, it's just my students. But I'm sure many of your listeners would have heard of the amazing book, Breath, The New Science of Lost Art, by James Nestor. The Oxygen Advantage by Brian McEwen. No, I've got that wrong. Patrick McEwen.
Okay, that one sounds familiar.
Yeah, Brian McKenzie and Patrick McEwen. Okay, two different people. Breathe away, but breathe well, breathe better. Yeah, I think we can all have better breath practice.
I kind of think of breathing in a really similar place to how I think about balancing, which is if we try too hard, we can almost choke it off. I see this tendency in students anyway. If they're trying so hard not to fall over that they're rigid, they'll fall. And if they're trying so hard to breathe deeply that they create tension in the neck or the jaw, or they're lifting up the collarbones, then they defeat the purpose of finding that freedom and ease. So any tips on how we can create that better breath with a sense of ease, with some sort of slightly looser grip around it?
Well, come back to the three pillars of breathing, which is to breathe in through the nose firstly, breathe low, which is take
As in
that
low
breath
in the
low
belly
into
or the diaphragm.
the diaphragm, the lungs, the belly, and to breathe slow. So just think about if you were to breathe into the nose, but sense that you're also breathing in to a straw, which is a fairly narrow aperture, but you've got two obviously nasal passages and this one is blocked, is if you focused on how long you can breathe in for, I can see you doing this now, and then slowly how long you can breathe out for, but make this a fluid, a relaxed way. You're breathing. You do this all the time. We just brought some awareness to your breath. And it might be easier for people to start lying down as opposed to sitting up. But then if you can also do it while you're walking, that's even more impressive to breathe in through the nose. One of the first sentences in one of the books I read about breathing is, for a long life, shut your mouth. Just breathe in and out through your nose.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not heading for a very long life, am I?
Yeah, but I mean, again, we can go a bit further. When you breathe through the nose, it is to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. In fact, go one step further. Breathing in actually is stimulation of the sympathetic, but the pauses and the breathing out is stimulating the parasympathetic. So if you took your breath as a box and you to think, okay, well, 3/4 of my breath could be in the parasympathetic mode and 1/4 in the sympathetic mode, again, that might just shift some people to thinking, wow, if I just breathe in, then that pause is important, that exhalation, that's important, and that other pause.
I like both of those tips because they both create quite a bit of space around the practice. The first one being not to necessarily strive for really deep breath, but to make it through the nose, to breathe down into the bottom of the rib cage and the abdomen, and then to make it slow. So you're not talking anywhere about depth, but just this sense of it having that ease around it. And then also noticing the pause, the exhalation, the pause, and giving them that little bit more breathing room, for lack of a better phrase, could make a big difference in people's experience.
Yeah, I would suggest people try it. Yeah, I mean the more modern science and certainly the ancient yogis and other, I think the Catholic Church and the Buddhist monks all came across the time for the most efficient breath is the 5.56 seconds in breath and out breath. They didn't mention about the pauses, but it's certainly you do it, you feel better in the sense that you have more cognitive, a bit more cognitive
like capacity or clarity.
Capacity, yeah, because you're oxygenating your brain. So, wow, that's any advantage I can get, I'm taking. Freaking oxygenate my brain.
So you've already started heading into where I wanted to go next, which is from all of your time teaching older adults, both in groups and one-on-one, and from working with seniors balance classes, from teaching in retirement villages, what have you started to take away into your own practice? What has started to sneak in? And I'm guessing breathing is part of it, given that you do your breathing practice as you're driving. What other takeaways have you taken in terms of how you would like to support yourself as you age?
Breathing, certainly, and then doing things consistently. So when it comes to a practice, I don't think as we age, and this is again my view, that we need to be doing the 30 minutes, 50 minutes, 60-minute classes. But I do think little and often. So if that is for you, that 10 minutes a day, keep doing that, okay, as you get older. Because the moment you think I'll miss it, or I'll take a week off, or I'll take a month off, it is harder, I would see, people coming back. And that's what I've seen, and that's what I've heard. People saying, oh, I haven't been to practice for 6 weeks. Oh, I'm going to feel it. And it's like, well, yeah, you could have been away for the 6 weeks and done something every day, whether that be breathing or whether that be, stretching, pre-shower, post-shower, or pre-bed, post getting up in the morning. There's something we can do. Yeah, life's not that busy that we can't snatch 5 or 10 minutes somewhere to do something. Yeah.
And you're right. If you don't use it, you really do lose it. So you have to be clear about the things that you want to be able to keep doing in your life. And that's not necessarily everything, but there might be some things, some planes of motion or the capacity to balance or the capacity to breathe fully and easily that you do really want to retain through the years. Anything else?
One of the things, well, with that, this is more from the being the therapist's point of view, is it, but it's really crossover to being also yoga and seniors yoga. We clean our teeth twice a day. That's your time to put your arm against the wall, the inside of the door jamb, and take on a shoulder stretch, or stand there on one foot and clean your teeth, or take a hamstring stretch. You don't have to put your leg up onto the vanity bench, but unless you can do that. But I mean, they're really good sort of cues to go, oh, okay, I can do this time.
And we know from habit formation research that if we can tie a desired habit to an existing one, we're much more likely to have success there. So if you think every day I want to practice standing on one foot, you're much more likely to do that if you tie it to something you do already, like, as you said, brushing your teeth or going to bed or getting up in the morning or even making your coffee and having a mindful pause while you wait for your coffee to brew. We do. We love coffee in our family, don't we?
Yes.
Anything else that you've taken away from what you've learned from watching older students into your own practice or into your own life?
Apart from the consistency, is that also have some variety. My yoga practice, I jokingly will say, has changed dramatically from when I first started doing yoga and finishing my yoga teacher training. I don't have a regular practice anymore. No. But having said that, the amount of classes that I teach, yes, gives me the top up. But then I'm also looking for functionality in my body, in my life. And I'm a very keen gardener now. And you'd be surprised how many yoga poses you get to when you're gardening. I do a lot of squatting, a lot of twisting that I sort of think, oh, wow, I'm doing it out there. So if we can, one thing I've learned from teaching that seniors is that if I can bring that functionality into something else that they can do in their life, then that's a win-win situation.
I love that. I think you've hit on some really important themes there. Breathing, definitely, keep your breathing mechanics, keep focusing on your breathing. The little and often, I couldn't agree with more. It doesn't need to be 60 minutes a day, but keep picking out those skills that you want to retain and continue to practice them. I love the fact that you added variety, because I think that's important too. We all have our preferences and our things that we lean to really easily. And sometimes it's good for us, not just physically, but even cognitively, to stretch those boundaries a little bit and to do things that don't come as naturally. And then relating things to real life, I think, is so crucial, because at the end of the day, really, that's all that matters. It doesn't really matter what we can or can't do on the yoga mat. The impact is outside of the yoga studio, outside the confines of the yoga mat, into our real lives. That's really the only place that matters.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And if you can take those things and become a healthier, and if that means also a happier person, if that means that you are more engaging, some people are more engaging than others, the whole introvert extrovert, but that might be something that blossoms when you do yoga or balancing as you age.
I love that. You've picked out most of the things that would make my top list as well, that really weren't things I was thinking about when I first started teaching, but the more time I've spent with older students, the more important they've become. It's made me think a little bit more about my own mortality and my own capacity to do the things that I do. And for me to be really grateful that I can, for now, charge up a mountain and go hiking. And I can, for now, get into bed really easily and get out of bed really easily and bend over to pick things up and make all of the weird, awkward shapes that you would make gardening, to be really grateful for the capacity that my body offers me and for its strength and resilience.
Exactly. And have that sense of thanks, because not to paint the doom and gloom, we just never know when it might not be there because of an accident or something. So, be thankful for what we have, but then also be mindful that if you want to stay within the realm of what you have now, then you're going to have to do something.
Yeah, I agree. We can be lucky or unlucky, but there's a lot that's within our control. So we might as well work on those things that we can control, knowing that the universe might have other plans for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that kind of wraps up the conversation on aging with yoga, unless there's something else that you feel, a burning topic that you feel like you want to draw out of that.
Gosh, I wish I'd like to say yes, but no.
So that wraps up our conversation for today. And while you have classes on yoga medicine online and people can certainly find you there as a guest teacher, you're actually pretty tough to track down other than that. Not super active on social media. Feel free to look for him, people. He's there, but he doesn't post very much. So if somebody was interested in the work that you're doing and they want to reach out or they're curious to learn more, where would you direct them to?
I actually do have an Instagram page. It's Mark Hunter Yoga Therapist. That's probably the best place. And we'll
link to it. People watch it. He'll never post, but definitely follow and see if anything interesting happens. Treat it as a research project.
If you want to watch stillness, that would be the one to follow.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time today and sharing your tips on all things related to aging well with yoga. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and I hope it inspires your listeners out there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.